All righty. Welcome to Object Lesson. This is a monthly first Friday speaker series that opens wide the cases of the museum's collection through the perspectives of individuals from the world of art, design, performance, community activism, education, and more. We're creating fresh dialogues about the collection and its objects through this program. The series invites you for an up-close and personal experience in a very, very informal, comfortable, safe environment that encourages an exploration of our collection. So with that, I'd like to introduce April's speaker, Elizabeth Coulter. We have our wonderful speaker tonight as the Delaware Division of Historical and Cultural Affairs Curator of Collections. Elizabeth Coulter participates in developing and installing exhibitions, presenting educational programs, providing access to the history collection, collaborating with partnering organizations, and expanding the profile and use of the collection. She holds a bachelor's degree in art history and American studies from Rutgers University and a master's degree in decorative art history from George Mason University and the Smithsonian Associates. So with that, I'd like to hand this over to Elizabeth.
All right, well, thank you for the very nice introduction, and thank you all for joining this evening. Today, I would like to share my take on the work of Betty Scarpino and particularly her work called The Missing Piece Negotiator. I was drawn to this piece for a number of reasons, but at first glance, I certainly connected with the overall form of the work. It's a work that is in two parts made of dogwood, and the first part is circular in shape, but it has these really beautiful organic planes that kind of swoop and mold into one another. There's one aspect of the form that is really smooth and shiny in its surface. And then there's another aspect that's sort of a circle within the circle that has a little bit more of a textured approach that creates contrast between the textures and the forms within the form itself. On the reverse, which is a little bit difficult from the picture that I have on screen, but I'll hold up and show you in the screen here. There is more incised decoration on the back, and again, it creates kind of a different look with the form than the face. And then the second part is wedge shaped. And this form has mostly smooth sides, but you can see that a little bit of the texture is in play based on the grain of the wood. So that kind of creates a new dimension within the piece as well. And both of the wood forms are on a black base. One base is a little bit more textured than the other, and mimics the texture that's found within the wood sculpture. But each piece kind of stands on its own in the way the form looks and interacts. But then beyond that, I start to think about the ways the forms interact with one another and speak to one another with their differences in approach to surface, to texture, to line, and the overall forms. And then thinking overall if they might connect with one another. Is this the piece that might fit into the overall circular piece, or are they existing on their own? I feel when you look at this sculpture, if you look at it in the round, it kind of changes your look, your perspective, and you see something entirely new depending on where you're standing and what you're experiencing. So beyond the form itself, I was intrigued by the title of the piece, which is The Missing Piece Negotiator. And right off the bat, maybe it's my own sense of humor, but I kind of resonated with this title thinking about my own role as curator of collections. As I mentioned earlier, trying to advance this slide and it's, oh, okay, there we go. As I mentioned earlier, I'm the curator of collections for the state of Delaware's Division of Historical and Cultural Affairs. This division works within the state, and we have many historic sites that we oversee, but my role works within the collections team. And the collections that we manage include an archaeological collection that's around 4 million artifacts that falls under my colleagues' purview. And I work with the history collection that's around 100,000 objects, which is still no small feat. This collection, come on in, starts in the 18th century and moves through contemporary day, but has strengths in fine art, decorative arts, and material objects of the everyday. The collection can be seen at a number of our historic sites that our division oversees. We have a Newcastle Courthouse Museum in Newcastle, the Johnson Victrola Museum, the Old State House, and the John Dickinson Plantation in Dover. And then we have the Swanndale Museum in Lewis, as well as a newly established site, Cooch's Bridge Historic Site in Newark. So all of these places are a place where you can see a portion of our collection on view, but most of it is at the repository where I work. And its start was in 1802 with a painting of George Washington, and it has really evolved over time. And with an old collection comes some interesting challenges. So we can deal with anything from some accession numbering issues to trying to identify found in collections objects, or looking to fill in an object's provenance that might be a little bit tenuous. And so I find my job sometimes literally tracking down a missing piece, or putting together a missing piece with its original object, or trying to incorporate new history and research that helps maybe fill in the missing gaps of an object's provenance. And beyond that, which definitely takes some negotiating, I also find negotiating in the actual exhibits and curation process, thinking about how exhibitions might fit into the overall vision and intention of the institution that I work for. So thinking about missing piece and negotiating is something that I find in my career. Sometimes this work can be challenging, but it's also a type of work that leads to so many discoveries and pathways, which I feel I can not only make a positive impact on collections, but I feel that kind of problem solving and uncovering and researching is something that affects me in a very profound way. And researching Betty Scarpino's work is definitely a true joy. Betty Scarpino is a prolific artist working in wood. She not only is very adept at wood turning, but also carving and creating prints. But beyond her work in wood sculpture, she also had a prolific art writing career. She had written numerous articles on different subjects, as well as holding an editorial role for the American Wood Turner, and made a great impact on that publication over time. She also is a mother and an educator, and in all of those realms of her career, she is quite an inspirational figure. And when I was delving into the history of the missing piece, I felt like that was a pretty pivotal moment in her overall artistic endeavor, and not just in her professional, but in her personal career. So the missing piece is a series of the artist, thank you, that had its title based off of the book by Shel Silverstein, who is an American poet and writer, musician, and playwright. And he wrote this book in 1976. It is a book that's about a quest and fulfillment. And it follows a circle that is looking for its missing piece, roughly, but it serves as a metaphor of searching for what is missing in your life. And it really emphasizes that it's not just the goal for what you're trying to be fulfilled with, but it's also the journey that it takes to get to that point that can be really enriching and important to the way that you're shaped as a person. So I pulled this passage, which reads, "Hi," it said. "Hi," said the piece. "Are you anybody else's missing piece? Not that I know of. Well, maybe you want to be your own piece. I can be someone's and still be my own. Well, maybe you don't want to be mine. Maybe I do. Maybe we won't fit well." And I felt like this passage really brought out the feeling of negotiating and thinking about your own identity, how it connects to something else, how it can be shaped by something else, and maybe be better for it. So when I think about that, and I think about maybe my initial impression of the form of the missing piece negotiator, I can't help but think about, now that I've seen the book, the connection to the form in the illustration, which is very two-dimensional, and we have the interaction and between the circular piece and the wedge and the way that they interact with one another. But you can see that Betty Scarpino has really brought a new life to this idea of this two-dimensional form and creates something so beautifully three-dimensional and something to explore. So within the piece itself, she had talked about the way the pieces in fact negotiate with one another, kind of their spatial relationship and their existence, but also how the wedge could be in fact a part of the circular piece and complete the whole, and that's exactly what a negotiator could actually achieve. But like a true three-dimensional form, while it's pictured on the screen like this, with the face, you can walk around it and the perspective changes. And if you kind of turn it on its side and think about the way they fit together with one another, it can open up new opportunities. So among the missing piece series, I figured I would bring some other examples to compare. On the left side of the screen is another version of the missing piece that has similarities to the object in the Museum for Art and Woods collection. It's got that circular form with a wedge shape out of it. It has the really beautiful smoothed edges, and in the center, there's a play of that similar kind of circular form with a wedge cut out, but it has this carved decoration that sort of looks like the ribs of a record, that kind of emphasizes that curve, that smoothed edge that kind of joins into the overall wedge shape. So it's playing with the addition and subtraction within the form itself. And then it sits again on a black base that has the same kind of curve that emphasizes that same movement within the piece. While the other work on the screen, on the right side of the screen, is a little bit of a departure from that original shape of that circular shape. It's a little bit more of an almond shape. And it has a smooth edge on the outside and that same kind of patterned carving that looks like the grooves of a record again. And like the piece in the Museum for Art and Woods collection, there are two pieces, two parts. So there's the almond shape and then the other shape, which is kind of teardropped or a wedge shape that's curved. And so that shares the same kind of decorations as its counterpart. So we look at the commonalities of the decoration to this or surface treatment. And then we also look at the way the pieces might come together or interact spatially, and then also if they were to meet one another. So overall, even though each sculpture within the Missing Piece series has a different output, there are definitely similarities in the way that she approaches form and the carved decorations, and it really showcases the artist's technique. And that is something that is a total staple of Betty Scarpino's work. So here on the next slide, I have a picture of her in turning mode, and then a picture of a close-up of her carving. Overall, the Missing Piece was created during a pretty formative time during Betty Scarpino's career. It was a part of major growth and development for her. She had been traditionally working with lathe-based sculpture, and at this time was really trying to push beyond the boundaries that had existed in turning wood. So beyond just turning the wood, she would remove the wood and remove parts of the turning and then maybe save others for later to interact with the piece or play with carving. And this really expanded the way that she worked with her sculptures and helped define her overall technique. For her process, she usually started with selecting a good piece of wood, and she would go to her stash and kind of contemplate what wood would be fitting for her particular sculpture that she had in mind. And she would like look at it and think about the different qualities that would maybe enhance her idea. And she, with this piece, worked in dogwood, but she's worked in cherry, ash, and walnut, among other types of woods. And after selecting the wood, she would drill a hole in the wood. And while in some traditional turning fashions, the hole would be in the center of the piece, but she would not necessarily choose that location. She would kind of play with the location where to start her turning process and then start turning. And the aspect of turning would maybe take a couple of hours. It's probably the faster part of her process of creation. And then began the actual part where she would be a little bit more inventive with the form itself in the carving and the play of form. When she carved, she used hand tools and power tools, depending on the technique that she wanted to highlight. And she did some light doodling or light drawing on the actual piece, but she didn't necessarily want to limit herself to what the doodles showed. She might follow it as a guide, but if it didn't really work for her in the moment of carving and thinking about the piece, then she would kind of scrap it and keep moving to what felt right in the carving stages. She also, while there's some fluidity and spontaneity in the way that she carves and manipulates her piece, she doesn't necessarily just do texture for texture's sake. She likes to use the way that the carvings might enhance the three-dimensional form and the experience of her pieces. after carving, she'll go into the sanding phase. And this is where some of her perfectionism shows. She'll go from different levels of grit all the way up to 3000. And if she gets to the end and realizes it's not to the desired silkiness, she'll go back over the process again, just to make sure she gets the desired effect and end result. And when that's all said and done, if the wood hasn't reached necessarily what she wants it to reach, she will do a different kind of surface treatment. And this gets back to how adept she is at different techniques. She might bleach the wood, she might use some coloring techniques in the paint, or she might use oil to kind of play with the dimension and overall look of the piece. And this overall creates boundless opportunity in the way her sculptures look and in the surface. And beyond all of that, she really takes joy in the process of creating the sculptures. She notes that she has this sort of like universal connection when she's working, that she tries to let her mind go a little bit so that she can channel her energy into the actual form. And that kind of freedom in the process is very fulfilling, and I think leads to some really inventive forms overall. And for me, that echoes originally the ethos of The Missing Piece. The Missing Piece, again, is about looking at the journey and the quest as equally as the end result. And I find that parallels in the way that she approaches her artistic process. She's looking at and has an idea of what the end goal will be, but ultimately she's looking at the process and enjoying the process along the way that gets her to that point. And I also see how that parallels overall with her artistic career and personal life. She also notes that when she's working, she is so passionate about working with wood that as she cuts, as she works with it, she feels that she's also being molded in a way, and that it has a profound impact on her own personal life, growth, learning, and understanding. And so when I think about her artistic career at large, I see a lot of that carry through the way that she carried her different identities. She started working with wood in 1975 when she took a woodworking class, and she was a student at the University of Missouri, and she studied industrial arts, but focused on woodworking. So she took several woodworking classes, but she also saw the importance of taking art classes at the same time. So she was taking art in clay, in drawing, and in sculpture. And that kind of influence had a really impactful moment on her fundamental understanding of the art. And so on one hand, she had the influence of her industrial arts and woodworking, which was very like supportive of her perfectionism and methodical way of working. And then on the other hand, she had her art classes, which were very encouraging of her freedom and expressive qualities through her work. So both of these experiences really shaped her at a fundamental point in her career. So after graduation in the 70s, she entered the field of wood turning, which at the time was mostly focused on production and like components of furniture. So naturally, she went into furniture making for utilitarian purposes. And this was also a formative point in her career because she focused on really like honing her technical skill and defining her process. And after working there for a bit in the 1980s, she opened her own studio that created like more utilitarian wares, like cutting boards and bowls and rattles and things of that nature. And while this period was kind of a longer period where she was honing her craft, it wasn't necessarily the most fulfilling for her. She has respect for more of the utilitarian production, and I can certainly see how that impacted her greatly. But overall, she was looking for something a bit more, perhaps, dare I say, the missing piece. So then you see her experimenting a little bit more with her own artistic processes as well. And one pretty pivotal moment was when she was attending a workshop in 1994 at the Aramont School of the Arts and Crafts in Tennessee. And it was at that moment that she first had that opportunity to like move beyond the lathe-based work and really start to break down the form, play with adding and subtracting, and kind of turning the lathe work into a sculpture that kind of defied the expectations of wood turning. And this kind of helped really define her style. And not long after that, she created her first real series called Altered Plates. And this kind of helped direct and steer her overall production and led to the moment where she could make the missing piece. It was also around this time that she started to explore different opportunities for growth. And one of the ways that she did so was participating in the residency program with the Museum for Art and Wood. So she was a resident in 1999 and in 2016. And it was a program that encouraged artists to work with one another for a couple of weeks. And this was a great way of collaborating and growing and learning from one another. But beyond that woodworking, it was also her career was very impactful in the overall field of wood turning. As I mentioned earlier, wood turning was mostly reserved for production, and it had basically focused on furniture making and making things precise, economical, and looking for rapid production, so working on a super fast pace. Whereas as Betty Scarpino was working and other wood turners were working to defy the medium of wood turning, the field began to open up and become more accepted as an artistic medium that kind of did the opposite of what its production was. So they were being valued for their creativity in form and overall uniqueness and the time it took them to produce these objects rather than pushing something out in such a rapid rate. So she had a profound impact on the field of woodworking and art and sculpture, but through her drive and in intention with her own work, she also opened so much opportunity for other artists, especially women artists. And this was also done through her work on the literary side of things. From 1988 to 1990, she had been an editorial assistant for a history publication. And then in 1990, she started as the first paid editor for the Wood Turner, the American Wood Turner publication. And at that time, she really worked to transform that publication. they had worked to incorporate more high-res images and color images for artists. They made sure that the scholars who wrote about the woodworking were compensated for their scholarly contributions. And I think it was changed from a release of 4 times a year to 6 times a year. So she was really ambitious and had done a lot for that publication over her time there, even serving as editor-in-chief from 2009 to 2014. And all the while she was working on her own sculptures, she was editing, she was writing her own pieces. She is a mother and an educator, and she really wanted to use her platform to create opportunity for others. So around that time, she was instrumental in getting the Women in Turning Committee started. So this was a way of not only sharing her own experiences and sharing her full experiences so that other people could be encouraged to do the same, but she really wanted to help others find their own pathways and ways of finding their own ambitions. And over the course of her career, she really made space for herself and demanded acceptance for who and how she wanted to work and be. And I think that's really admirable. So over the course of her career, her work has landed in international collections. It's at the Smithsonian in the Renwick Gallery, as well as in the Museum for Art and Woods collection. So here I have a couple of the examples of her other works that are in the collection. And I believe most of them are on view right now. So for those of you who are joining in person, you can take a look in the permanent collection galleries and go on a little bit of a hunt to see Betty Scarpino's other works. Most of them are from her residency in 1999, but also there's a newer sculpture from 2016. And what I love about this slide in general is how just in a small screenshot, you can see the range and expertise that she brings to her overall work. And it's quite an inspiration. And so I think about the period that she created the missing piece, which was towards the beginning of her career, a time where she was really thinking about her place as an artist and her goals within that field and all her other identities and how they shape one another, and how her career has evolved over that time. So I think about her path as an editor, teacher, woodturner, artist, and storyteller. And overall, hopefully this will encourage you to consider what drives and fulfills you. So thank you for attending my talk this evening, and please let me know if you have any questions. Sure.
I have a question.
Yes.
Do you know how common it was for women to be into woodworking in the 70s?
I think because of the overall artistic revolution that was happening in the 1970s, there was maybe more of a period that fostered more experimentation in medium, but I do remember reading a little bit about her at that time, and I think that she had mentioned that there weren't too many women that were trying to do both wood turning and taking the art classes, and there was a little bit of like her trying to prove her instructor and other fellow students wrong in her art class. That like, I think the first round of her sculpture assignment being graded, she was at the end and she hadn't done very well, but by the next round she had really invested and rose to the top. So I think in a way she's always been trying to defy the expectations and pave a path for others to to join in on that too. Any other questions? Oh, thank you.
Yes, it was.
Cool. Yeah.
Other
Carolyn.
question. How does the size of the other pieces in the permanent collection compare to these little guys?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. Thank you for bringing that up. So I think towards the beginning of her career that she worked a little bit on a smaller scale, just by nature of the turning and the equipment and the materials that she had access to. But in opportunities like the residency program, I believe that she had more of a chance to work on a larger scale and experiment a bit more. So most of the collection here are on a smaller scale, but there is one that is quite a bit larger. Kind of like.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I just want to say that assess in the chat. Elizabeth, you chose one of these.
Oh, thank you so much. That was very nice of you to say.
I just have a question. If you could just speak towards like the femininity that exists in Betty's, work.
Yeah. So I think that that's definitely something that has been brought up a lot in the literature of her work. I think in some ways she's emphasized that in her form and sculpture and overall practice, but I think that she also works to maybe defy some of that and create more space for other conversations around her work. I don't know if it fully answers, but that was my interpretation, at least. Any other questions? Well, thank you all for joining. I really appreciate it. Oh, we have a question?
The metaphor of negotiation is so apt for the personal lives of thinking through craft and artistic processes, and also for thinking about what elements divide two sides. I appreciated how you connect this to your work. Are there other thoughts that came up?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I definitely think that there's definitely negotiation that happens in my work. When I think about the objects that I'm trying to make more accessible and thinking about the history that the object carries, and not just the object that the history that the object carries, but also how it might connect to people and what histories our audiences might value. So I'm continually negotiating, like maybe how historically we have interpreted and speak about objects, and how we can maybe push that mold a little further to engage in new meaning. And that carries definitely into exhibitions and curation, thinking about like my voice and my role and how that might impact someone's understanding of a time, a place, the object, and how someone else might have an entirely new perspective. So someone might look at this object and come up with an entirely new presentation too. And that voice is important to be thinking about and negotiating too in any kind of work or practice, especially in curation. Thank you for that question.
Nice looking for that missing piece. Thank you.
Definitely.
We do have, I just want to say a couple of words about our current exhibition. It's running now through July 23rd, and that's the Mashravia project. and seeing through space. I'm just gonna go ahead and bring in these images.
Yep.
You're good. Oh, I see Nava. I'll go ahead and put this in gallery view so everybody can see. Hi, Nava.
Hi, hi, hi,
Um,
everyone. That was great. That was really wonderful. Thank you.
is wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much, Nava.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone for joining us on this holiday weekend. We look forward to seeing you in our galleries and in our next event, which is coming up next week on the 12th. Check out our events page and follow us on our Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. And we will see you soon. Everyone be well, be safe, and be nice. All right, take care.
Bye.